Thanks so much. The horns were great. And also, thanks to everybody who just played, including Dr. David Rocks, one of our retired professors of music, joined us here this morning. Well, happy, for most of you, long weekend eve, right? How many of you need 4 days off? Enthusiastically, I'll tell you how many days off I need. Like, yes, 4 days off. Thank you. How many of you have quad finals tomorrow or Friday? I'm really sorry. No. I hope they go well and that you get a little bit of a chance to breathe too. You know, this morning, I want us to take a look at what happens when we have fresh eyes. Fresh eyes, meaning that, you know, I wander around too much for this to be here. 1 second. Fresh eyes, when you look at something in a new way, right? Have you ever gone someplace and then you go back there and it's like, oh, look at that. I didn't see that. There are lots of times in our lives that we get a new perspective, or we might ask, oh, what did you see it? What did you see? If you've ever gone somewhere with somebody else and you talk about what you saw, and it'd be like, well, we're in the same place. Sports teams often will say, what did you see? Baseball, especially, right? You get up at bat, and the pitcher's, you know, what's the pitcher got? And you come back, and you'll often see, even in the major league games, on the way back to the dugout, especially if it was a strikeout, you'll see the batter who just struck out say something to the person on deck as they're walking up. Like, basically, this is what I saw. This is what I saw. If you watched last night, the Texas Rangers eliminated the Baltimore Orioles. Is that good? Okay. And there's a pitcher pitching for the Texas Rangers called Nate Eovaldi. Nate Eovaldi struck out 7 guys, like just dominated to be the winning pitcher, and every Red Sox fan who was watching thought, why can't we get players like that? Right? If you don't know that, he was the Red Sox until this past season, where we decided we think he's used up, so we're going to let him go elsewhere. And he dominates, right? That's sort of the theme in Boston sports right now. You know, other sports teams sometimes call an early timeout. Basketball might call an early timeout just to sort of say, like, okay, this is what the other team's doing, and how are we going to approach this, right? Because our eyes have been opened. Our eyes have been opened. To Patriot fans this year, our eyes have been opened, and they stink. They just stink, right? And so what do you see when you look around? Or maybe the more important question is, who do you see when you look around? Who do you see? This morning, I want us to look at a very familiar passage. It's taken from Acts chapter 9, verses 1 through 19. And there it is. Okay, I'm going to ask you to stand. Let's read this together. A little aerobic exercise. Ready? Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus whom you are persecuting, he replied. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So he led them by hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. In Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called him in a dream. Ananias. Yes, Lord, he answered. The Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name. But the Lord said to Ananias, go, this man is a chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and to their kings and the people of Israel. And I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. But Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, Brother Saul, Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit. And immediately something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. Great job. Have a seat. You know, this is a passage that's quite familiar, right? The one that you learned in Sunday school when you were little, if you went to Sunday school. And it's a great example of what is a divine appointment. Right? I preached on Ananias a while ago, because Ananias, I think, is one of the most brave people in the New Testament. Saul had a reputation, and you could hear even in this passage, right, when God's Spirit calls out to Ananias, Ananias, I got a job for you. Go meet this guy Saul. And Ananias is like, God, have you checked his resume? Because I'm not sure, do you have this right? And God says, go. And when he got there, one of my favorite parts about Ananias is he was all in. Right? He walked up to him, and his first words were, Brother Saul. Brother Saul. Right? So, divine appointment. God uses Ananias to heal the blindness of Saul. And Saul had no idea at that point that he would become Paul. And ultimately, that one divine appointment resulted in the majority of the New Testament and the birth of the church and the expansion of the church, right? So when we look at this, early on, Saul's being a good religious leader, and his job, as he saw it, was to, let's put down this uprising, and we're going to capture these folks who are calling themselves Christians, who are following this carpenter, who we've hung on a cross, and he's on task. He is a man on task. But God was not deterred, because God had a new task that he had for Saul. I think it's interesting that when you look at this, Saul is blinded by the light. Blinded by the light. And it's in this encounter that he has on the road where he hears Jesus call out and says, I am Jesus. I'm the one you're persecuting. I'm the one you're persecuting. And Saul went from a man filled with power to a man who was helpless and ultimately needed to be led by the hand into the city. It's like God took and saw Saul and said, Saul, it's time for you to go into timeout. It really was like a forced 3-day retreat to refocus. Saul goes from the authority and the power and the man who was feared to the one who was helpless, maybe hopeless, maybe feeling like, shoot, I'm in trouble. Because I've been rounding up these Christians, and I just heard the voice of Jesus say, why do you persecute me? And so Saul may very well have also felt, what future do I have? What future do I have? So it really is like he was put in a place of submittance, right? Rather than giving the orders, you're in timeout until further notice. What can we learn just from that? Don't write people off. Sometimes as Christians and sometimes as the church, we really like to sort of be the ones who look around and say like, boy, that person would be a great Christian. Great Christian. If we could just reach her, we're gonna be rocking right along here. If we could just meet him, it's like God's not looking for us to put together an all-star team. Because in him, anything is possible with anybody. With anybody. Saul was proof of that. It was proof of that. So don't ever write people off and say God could never use them. And alongside that, and maybe more importantly, don't ever write yourself off and say God could never use me. Because sometimes we're even quicker to do that. Like, God, look at all these gifted people around here. Look at all these gifted people. Like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? When I was a student here, in my apartment over in Bromley, yes, it was here, even back then. It was squeaky new, but it was here. I lived with 3 other guys who were just stinking brilliant. I was a real average student. I worked really hard to pass. One of my roommates, you know what he did every finals week? He would sit in our living room and read Lord of the Rings. Because he didn't need to study. He glanced through things. He sat through class. He hardly took notes. His mind captured everything that was said. And he was the one who would go over for an exam that was scheduled for 2 hours, and he'd be back in our apartment in 35 minutes. Down deep. How many really don't like people like that? Right, when you're sitting there going like, oh, she have a question? Oh, she's done. Right? And there were lots of times, I looked at that and I thought, these 3 guys, like, what are they going to do in the world? One of them has done incredible works in optics and science. The other one has done things in politics. The other one has done things in this. And there are lots of days that I used to sit there and think like, how in the world is God going to use me? Because look at the talent that I'm surrounded by. And it's really easy as a student to get your head in that place. And look and see like, well, maybe if God has a taxi squad, I can make it. I'll be on the JV. God does not have JV. God has starters, and everybody can be a starter. So don't write people off, and don't write yourself off. His life was changed by the faith of Ananias. God needed somebody who could go there and be the hands-on. We always talk about being the hands and feet of Jesus. That's exactly what walked up the steps in that house that day. The hands and feet of Jesus in the person of Ananias, where God had a divine appointment for him. And scales, when Ananias prays over Saul and puts his hands on him, says, scales fell from his eyes, and he could see. He could see. You know, physically, he could see. And spiritually, he could see in a whole new way. A whole new way. Those eyes that were so focused on eliminating whatever the remnant was of this group named Jesus, followers of Jesus, now all of a sudden found himself on the team with fresh eyes. When he went out and he looked at the synagogues, and when he went out and he went to these gatherings of Christians in homes who once would cower at the thought that he was coming, now he looked at those instead as brothers and sisters in Christ. His eyes were opened, and his vision changed. For those of you who wear glasses or contacts to see far away, what was it like the first time you put them on? Right? I never knew I needed glasses. I mean, my vision was sort of good, and my daughter was playing soccer in high school, and I was late to her game, so I got there, and she played sweeper, and she had long brunette ponytail and single digits. She was number 4, and I'm on the sideline, and I'm at the game, and I was like, "Go, Amanda! Go!" I was great play, man. I'm like yelling her name, and the enthusiastic dad that I am when it comes to cheering my family on. Right? So I'm all in. And so then it's halftime. And one of the other parents comes over and goes, "Where's Amanda today?" It's like, "I thought she was out there." He says, "Oh, no." Then the girl walked over closer. She had a long brunette ponytail, and she was wearing number 9, not number 4. And I'm thinking, man, I should get my eyes checked. So I get my eyes checked, right? And it was just like, and your first time you put on contacts or you put on glasses, and it's like, oh. Right? So I wore contacts for a number of years, and then the doctor said, I think if we do LASIK surgery on your right eye as your distant eye, I bet you'll see just fine. It's like, all right. So LASIK surgery. So I go from all the time, LASIK surgery, one eye. The surgery is done, and you look up, and you got to put on sunglasses when you go outside because they've been just only searing the surface off your eye. But it was like high def. The whole world went high definition like this because my vision was different and my vision was corrected. Vision is so important. And my question for you is, Saul's world changed through the hands of Ananias, through God's work in Ananias, and God's work in his heart. God prepared Saul to look at the world in a new way and recognize that, the church should not just live in Jerusalem. I think I need to book a few trips and missionary journeys. And Saul takes on with this new vision, I need to go. This cannot stay here. This needs to go everywhere. And now I understand when Jesus said, go into all the earth, to Samaria, Judea, everywhere, and spread the gospel. Saul, as Paul, all of a sudden is like, game on. I now have what it is that I'm supposed to do. When you're looking out at your future, I hope you look at it with those types of eyes. God, whatever you're studying, God needs people in the profession to which you are aimed. God needs people everywhere to represent him and to go in with eyes wide open. But also, divine appointments. I'm such a believer in that God sometimes, there are places and things that I have been, and at certain times that just aren't accidents. How many of you have had experiences like that, where it's just like, this is not a coincidence that I am here? Now, sometimes I wish I wasn't here, but I am here, right? And this is what I see. I'll share two examples where God met me at the same house in a small town outside Quito, Ecuador. I went on a scouting mission one year to prepare to take my kids the next for my high school group. And we went and we traveled around Division Compassion Projects. How many of you know what Compassion International is? Great organization, life-changing. So we went, I just went to sort of, along with another group, right, to sort of see how this would happen if I brought my group the next year. And we came into this little town, and one of my good friends who lives in Denver was like, I'd like to sponsor a child here. Her heart was really moved. And so the director of Compassion in this little town says, come on. There's a mom over here who has some sons, and maybe you could sponsor one of them. So we go over to this lady's house, tiny, tiny little house. She's a widow, and she calls out to her boys, and I believe she had 5 boys in total. 4 came out and stood there, like 2 were already in the project. And the director asked her, she goes, "Where's your other son?" And she says, he's inside. He's just very, very sick. And so they said, "Can we go and see him?" And they went in and found a 10-year-old boy in the heat of Ecuador underneath a pile of blankets, frail, hanging on for life. And they asked her, like, "Why haven't you taken him to a doctor?" And she said, I could never afford a doctor. So I pray that he gets better. And so they asked her, like, "What does a doctor cost?" And she laid it out in sucres, which was the monetary value there at that time. And it came down to $6.50. And all these high school kids were like, "$6.50? Oh, I've got that. I've got that. I've got that." And they picked up the little boy. They brought him to the hospital. Doctor said he was hours from dying of malnutrition. He was 10 years old, weighed 65 pounds, skin and bones. And there was a compassion button that said 20,000 a day. That's how many kids die of preventable causes. And my friend got a button and she crossed it off, and it said 19,999. Because this one's going to live. Right? So the students in that group afterwards, they were like, he was going to die for less than a value meal at McDonald's. Less than a value meal. And that reached in and grabbed me. And the next year I brought my own group there. And we went to the same house, and I thought, we're going to bless this lady so that her kids are never hungry again. And we bought like giant bags of corn and rice, like all the staples. And we dragged them into her little courtyard, and we set them down there. And she comes out and just looks, and we're like, "How's Enrique?" And Enrique, at that point, was like the stud goalie for the town soccer team. Full recovered, big, strapping kid, right? And like a total healing. And so she's staring at this food, and everyone's sort of wondering, like, okay, what's going on? And one of the girls in my group, I remember her name was Vicky. She had just become a Christian like the month before. And it was a pretty emotional time here with this lady, right? And seeing this kid. So Vicky asked me, can I go to the bus? I was like, yeah, go ahead. So she goes to the bus, and I see her outside, and she's squatting down, and all I could see, it was like if I'm back there, all I could see was her hands going like this. And she came walking up with the most thread-worn towel, because I told them, bring the ones that from home, the next stop's the car wash bucket. This thread-worn towel, and she asked me, can I give this to her? I said, yeah, go for it. So she walks up to this woman who is still standing there staring at this food. She hands her a towel. The lady audibly gasps, goes back, sits on a stump, and begins to sob uncontrollably. And so then I'm like, oh my gosh, cultural faux pas. Like, what did we do? What did we do? What did we do? She cried for about 10 minutes, just heaving. And afterwards, finally, when she settled down, the translator from the village came over and asked her, are you okay? And her words were, in my wildest dreams, I never thought that God would so bless me as to give me a towel. This lady and her family lived with rags. And she was overwhelmed. And I looked at Vicky. I'm like, Vicky, how'd you think of that? And she said, a new Christian said, maybe for the first time in my life, I heard the voice of God. But what happened was Vicky looked at that situation and she saw something. She saw something that she could do something about. And she took it at that moment as like, this is my divine appointment. I can sit here and think I could do something to help here, or I could just get up and do it. And she did it, and it radically changed this family. A simple act, because her eyes were clear to see something that nobody else did, because God tapped her on the shoulder and said, you can make a difference here. Open eyes. We all live busy lives. We all live busy lives. And I hope that all of us also understand that God can use us, that God will use us if we are willing to see what is in front of us and have our eyes open. Bill's going to come up and play a closing song that we're going to sing, and we're going to sing this as our prayer. God took a man named Saul and changed the world. God can insert your name, and recognize that you could change the world.